Mac guys here with you on Birds 365. We're closing in on the Eagles' return to the field after their Monday night loss to the Washington Commanders. I think John and I are both less worried about the fact that they lost the game, that they lost Dallas Goedert, and they also have some other injuries that they have to deal with. What is the state of the Eagles? We bring in Ed Kracz because he knows better than anybody on the planet. Ed Kracz, right now, what is the state of the Philadelphia Eagles?
8-1.
That's true.
That's all I can tell you.
Stick to the
Jim
numbers,
Schwartz
Eddie.
does. Yeah. What's 8-1? We're playing 8-1 football, Jim Schwartz would say.
8-1. I mean, come on. Listen,
That's
middle of
good.
November until their first loss. The biggest concern for me is it happened in the NFC East. This division's very good this year, and to me, it looks like they might not do any better than 3-3. They have 2 left with the Giants. They'll probably split. They have 1 left with the Cowboys. They'll probably lose. It's 3-3. Is that going to be good enough to win? I think it will, because I think you take care of business outside the NFC East. And
is it good enough to get you the first seed? Because that's the goal.
I don't know. The Vikings are right there now with 1 loss. They're, the Eagles really are a game ahead because they have that tiebreaker on the head.
By the way, and maybe both of you guys, because you get the SI odds. Jody, you're a gambling guy. Why the hell is Dallas favored over Minnesota, and the game's in Minnesota?
Well, that's a good question. Maybe because they think, hey, Minnesota had this, huge win in Buffalo.
Yeah, that might play into it.
Be a little
play into it.
That's legit.
Cowboys,
you sound like a seasoned gambler there, Ed Kracz. I didn't think that was the case.
Yeah, by the way, I don't necessarily disagree because I haven't believed in Minnesota or the Giants all season, but I was just surprised to see that line.
How many points is it? What is the line?
I think Dallas is favored by 1, so it's not significant, but it's a road game, and the home team's 8-1, and that's typically a difficult place to play. It just stood out to me, but it's Birds 365, so we got to talk about the Eagles. Now, the Eagles are on the road. I told Jody, and I'm surprised. I want to run this by you, Ed. I'm surprised how quickly not everybody, but a portion of the fan base has gone from I don't see a loss on the schedule to the pearl clutching of I don't see a win on the schedule. Jonathan Taylor, how are they going to stop Jonathan Taylor and Aaron Jones and Saquon Barkley and blah, blah, blah. 8-1. I mean, and by the way, Nick Sirianni isn't letting Jim Irsay off the hook this week. I'm very confident in the Eagles this week. Where are you?
Yeah, I'm probably down the middle here. I was concerned about this game against Washington. I thought it could be a loss.
Yeah, you were all week, but you didn't show the courage of your convictions. Ed all week was saying the Eagles are going to lose this game, and then at the end, I think he went Eagles by a field goal. You pegged it.
I did. My bad there. But that's why I don't gamble. Anyway, those are legitimate concerns with the running backs you mentioned. But this is Philadelphia, right? It's the city of overreaction, more or less. You don't see a loss on the schedule when they're sitting there at 6-0, 7-0, 8-0, and now they lose a game. It's like, oh my gosh, the sky's falling. I don't see a win here. It's probably that way in a lot of cities, but. There's wins left on this schedule. I mean, the Eagles are a good team, and there's been a lot of talk about refocusing and regathering this week after that loss, and I could certainly see it. I think the Eagles just overlooked the Commanders. I think they just they weren't ready. They hadn't played in a long time, so their mental edge probably wasn't what it needed to be. I think it's good that they're on a short week. They only have 6 days instead of the normal 7 or whatever it is to get ready for this game or to play this game. So. I like that fact, and I think that loss could be galvanizing. Now, we've seen teams go 8-0 before, and I think all of them. I think it's happened 10 times, and I think all of them made the playoffs. But some teams have really hit the skids, like Andy Reid's Kansas City,
Arizona. Last year.
Last year. Andy Reid went 2-5 over the last 7 games after hitting 9-0. So it could happen that they don't play as well, but I don't think that'll be the case. I think there are definitely wins left on this schedule, and they'll get the job done.
All right, Ed. Nick Sirianni said yesterday that Linval Joseph gave them a hard time last year playing for the Chargers in a game that LA was in here and beat the Eagles. Yet they didn't sign him till Marlon Tuipulotu went on injured reserve. So that tells me they think Linval Joseph is better than Big Marvin Wilson. What can Eagle fans expect from Linval Joseph stepping in here for the next couple of weeks? Because the coach was selling it pretty good yesterday. Joseph's going to be able to come in and play, even though he hasn't been on a field in 10 months.
I listen. I get the sense that Linval Joseph wouldn't be here if Marlon Tuipulotu didn't get hurt. But once he went down, they placed a call to Linval Joseph instead of Ndamukong Suh, and said, "Why don't you come in and play nose tackle for us?" And we don't know what kind of shape he's in or condition he's in. Someone sent me an Instagram that he put out there that showed him working out and being ready and talking about his 2 daughters. And, he still wants to play and he's waiting for the right opportunity. And he looked in good shape. It showed him working out.
He's big. I can confirm he's big.
Yeah. What did he weigh? Like 350 pounds or something when he played? I'm sure he hasn't lost any weight. So if anything, he's probably gained a few pounds, but there's teams are still going to have to block him. It's not like, we can just ignore Linval Joseph in the middle. You're still going to have to send a blocker at him, maybe 2. So I think he'll help this team. It's going to be interesting to see how many plays he has against Jonathan Taylor and the Colts on Sunday. But, I think can still play. But Robert Quinn really hasn't showed any ability to continue playing. But I think Linval Joseph might be a little different, and I think he'll help the team. This team on the run defense certainly could use some help in the middle. Javon Hargrave's having a terrific season, a half sack away from his career high. He has 7, but he's not a run stopper, really. He's a very good pass rusher. And then Fletcher Cox, he hasn't played, overwhelmingly well at all. He played all those snaps on Monday night, 70 snaps.
And he feels like crap, by the way.
Yeah, he said he didn't feel real good body-wise. So, but what else were they going to do? It was a bad rotation. You didn't go into the game thinking you were going to have to take 83 reps on defense.
No.
But, you mentioned Marvin Wilson. I think he would have at least given them – you knew that Washington was going to run the ball. Why wouldn't you play Marvin Wilson? He's not a typical nose center. He can play any spot along that D line, but at least he was able to provide some reps. And maybe in his second straight start or game, he would have played better than he did in Houston.
Yeah, I was a little surprised they didn't elevate Marvin.
I was very surprised. Game. Absolutely. But
Linval, I think they should have.
Yeah, they should have. Absolutely. But Linval's better, and he'll be a better option in the middle for the defense.
Yeah. Now, you bring up a good point. And, I was thinking about this yesterday, the 83 reps. That was part of the issue. Now, there's no, the defense isn't going to get indicted for getting off the field. It's certainly partially their problem that they can get off the field. But I think the dislike of Jonathan Gannon and the way he plays defense for a lot of the fan base, again, not everybody, but a lot of the fan base, has sort of masked what a poor performance the offense had in that, and the fact that they were off the field so quickly, whether it was turnovers, 3 and outs. If I told you before that game, Ed, the Washington would run the football 45 times, whatever it was. I think it was more than that.
49 times.
49 times. They'd average 3.1 yards per carry. Their longest run would be 11 yards. Would you think we'd be talking about how bad the run defense was?
Well, that's a number that you could throw out there, but really it helped set up the play action stuff too, that Washington was able to keep the Eagles off balance. And, they had some wide open receivers because they tried to stop the run at some point, and the play action was more effective because they were able to run the football. And yeah, if you told me they were running the ball 49 times and they averaged 3.1 yards a game, I'd say the Eagles are in trouble because that's a time of possession thing when you're able to run the ball
all the time. Yeah,
times.
But that's kind of my point. Doesn't that also factor with the offense? Was it kind of getting a pass?
Absolutely. Listen, the Eagles had 6 minutes of time of possession in the first half, and So I know the numbers are skewed, but they ran the ball. They got that turnover at the 18-yard line on Josh Sweat's fumble, and they ran it. Jalen Hurts runs for 12 on a designed run.
Yeah.
Boston Scott picks up 5, and then Hurts sneaks it in, and then it becomes a passing show. They needed to run the ball more in the first half to keep Washington's offense off the field, and they just kept throwing it. And it was just a bad game plan from Sirianni. Like we talk about the players maybe not being sharp after that layoff. I don't think the coaches were any good either. And now they're going to have to make up for it. But I just think that, it was a poor game plan going in. They didn't do well. I thought they got out coached. And that's what happens. They end up losing.
Now, the reason why I'm less perturbed about the offensive coaching than the defensive coaching is the two biggest plays were fumbles. And none of them got coached to fumble. When Goddard gives the ball up, turns it over, that's not on a coaching decision. When Quez Watkins tries to make a big play, gets up after being down and fumbles the football, that's not on a coaching decision. So that's why I'm a little bit more critical of the defensive coaching game plan this week than the offensive. To that end, Ed, and I did the math last night, the tight end reps for the Commanders were 123. If you had all three tight ends, Thomas, Bates, and Rodgers in, they were on the field for 123 snaps, and the Commanders had 83 offensive snaps. That means 40 snaps, they had two tight ends on the field, 40 plays during the game. Are you telling me during those 40 plays that Josiah Scott is better suited to potentially stopping the run than putting in the Kobe Dean on the field as an extra linebacker? And yes, I know they can pass just because they have two tight ends doesn't guarantee they're going to run. Oh, the Commanders ran it a lot. Now, 2020 hindsight, we know what the play calls were. They ran a lot when they were in two tight end. Why wouldn't you put an extra linebacker on the field if the other team's got two tight ends out there?
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you that at all. I think they should have put Nakobe Dean in, and I think they should put Nakobe Dean in on Sunday in Indianapolis because that's a good way to stop the run. I know John wrote about this and made a good case for, the defensive philosophy to remain the same. But that doesn't mean, like you said, when they have 12 personnel out there, two tight ends, more often than not, you're probably going to run. But even if they pass, Nakobe Dean can cover. At least he could do it at Georgia. Kaiser White can cover. He showed that ability already this season and in with the Chargers last year. So it's not like if they throw a curveball and throw out of 12 personnel, it's like, oh my gosh, the Eagles are going to get beat here because they don't have guys that can cover. But yeah, I think it's time for Nakobe Dean to have some kind of role here. You just can't keep running the same scheme and expect different results, right? Isn't that what Joe Banner said about the definition of sanity, to expect things to change by doing it over and over again or something like that? So there's got to be something different that they do here. And Nakobe Dean is a linebacker with a pedigree. Why not get him involved somehow? Why not carve out a role? And I'm not saying, 40, 50 snaps. I mean, play him for 15 to 20 snaps. Try to play that game of chess to match up with the other team, whatever they decide to do with their tight ends. And even without their tight ends, you could still use Nakobe Dean on the field. And do you like him better than Josiah Scott? I would say probably, yeah, I do. If Maddox was still healthy, then maybe not so much. But, yeah, I would take Nakobe Dean over Josiah Scott, and I would try something different and go with three linebackers to try to stop the run a little bit better.
Yeah, to me, it comes down to, look, the Eagles play defense the way they play defense, and most Philadelphia fans don't like the style they play defense. I think it's got more to do with the back end than the front, because their whole defense is built on, quarters coverage or cover 2, cover 6, depending on what they're going to play. And all of a sudden, if you mix with that, if you mix with one part of it, you're messing with the back part of it. And that's why Linval's here, because they didn't have the big nose tackle to take up 2 blocks, and all of a sudden it starts showing up. And I think that's, one of the big mistakes, one of the few mistakes that Howie Roseman made in building this roster, not having a backup, a true backup to Jordan Davis at nose tackle. And that's why they went so quickly and tried to solve that issue. We'll see if they did solve the issue. with Nakobe Dean, I think it complicates things because he was so good in college and he was so good at Georgia, and people remember, and he had such a big reputation. And like, how do you not get Nakobe Dean on the field? If he's getting on the field, he's getting on the field for Kaiser White. So that to me is the question. Do you want him on the field instead of Kaiser White? And I think, by the way, maybe the most overrated player by the fan base through 8 games was Kaiser White. So I think that's the better case, to be honest.
Okay.
They're not taking the nickel off
honestly,
the field.
Ed and I think that the defensive coordinator should have more than just this narrow focus ability to do it, because they got beat this week by the Commanders with Taylor Heineke and James Robinson. They're facing better quarterbacks and better running backs coming up in these next few weeks. And if Jonathan Gannon's attitude is, hey, our defense is our defense and I ain't changing, Eagles could be screwed.
Well, then let me frame it this way. Larger picture, who's overreacting, who's underreacting? 8-1, number 3 defense in the NFL. Why are you changing from that?
I just think because of that, what Washington was able to do on the ground, what Houston was able to do on the ground, even though they didn't win. The Eagles they run defense has been leaky for the last month now, and they've been able to overcome it because they had these historic second quarters where they outscored teams at a ridiculous rate. So they had leads, and they were okay with letting a team try to come back on the ground as long as they didn't get beat over the head. Let them chew up some clock on the ground instead of hitting a big play over the top and kind of shorten that comeback. So they were okay with that. But against Washington, they didn't score a single point in the second quarter. They trailed at halftime for the first time this year by 6 points. It was completely different than what they saw. So Washington stuck with the run. And I think you just can't shrug that off and say, well, okay, that was an anomaly. You have to look at it very harshly and say, what can we do differently? And like Jody said, I mean, if it means a role for Dean, and I'm not saying take Kaiser White off the field. Dean's been cross-trained, and Kaiser White's been in this league. I mean, you can put 3 linebackers on the field. There's no rule that says you can't use 3 linebackers. And then if you have a slot receiver, maybe you bring you play a 1 safety deep with Epps back there, and you bring Chauncey Gardner-Johnson into the slot or a little closer to the line to pay attention to that slot receiver. I mean, there are things you can do to try to stop another team from running against you. Yeah, you're 8-1, but if you can't figure out what teams are doing and they're going to run at you, and if 8-1 becomes 8-2 or 8-3, then you have a problem. And why wait until that point? Why not try to kind of be proactive and figure out how to do it and try something a little different schematically?
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways. And you mentioned I was surprised that Marcus Epps was moved into the slot in Houston when Devonta got hurt. There are questions. You can have questions every week about how things have blamed out, but that's why I look at that game in Washington. I think the bigger concern was the back end than the run defense. Now, I'm not saying the run defense was great. I called it the Leroy Horde game. They're giving up just enough each play to make it difficult on the back end. But the bottom line is you got to get off the field on 3rd down, and they had communication issues. Darius Slay probably had his worst game of the year. Isn't that self-correcting? Darius Slay is Darius Slay. I don't expect him to play like that every week. And if you get on the field, if you get off the field on 3rd down, isn't 3.1, isn't the most explosive run of 11 yards? Isn't that acceptable?
Well, listen, I think when you look at the back end, they had to kind of freeze a little bit with the play action because Washington kept them off balance with that run game. And, once you freeze just that brief second, you're going to get an open receiver to hit, be able to hit in the passing game. So I think the running really exposed the back end's flaws there. And that was just kind of reading and trying to freeze for a second to see if they were going to run and come up and stop the run. And then they didn't. and then they were beaten a little bit. So I don't know. You were right about the miscommunication. I really think that inactivity, 2 games in 28 days really impacted them more than they'll admit. But yeah, I think again, you need to be proactive here, and you need to find a way to make sure that running game you get off, and you get off the field. And if you stop the run and you're not able to play action as much, then you'll be able to get off the field. But they were in 3rd and 4. I think all their 3rd downs were 3rd and less than 5. Maybe
they were not good on 3rd and short. They're never good on 3rd and short.
Well, you can't give up yards on 1st and 2nd down. Then the offense is dictating to the defense, and you're able to do things like play action and hit wide open receivers. I think that was more of the issue with the back end, was just they were off balance and they weren't communicating well.
And they're definitely missing Jordan Davis. There's no doubt about that. And one of the places that shows, Ed, is John mentioned, we talked about yesterday, Darius Slay throws in his biggest clunker of a game all year. He's a Pro Bowl level player. He was playing to a Pro Bowl level the first 8 weeks of the season. So you assume, all right, everybody have a bad game. He goes back to being a Pro Bowl level player. Fletcher Cox was a Pro Bowl player as well a couple of years ago, and there was a drop-off last year, and the drop-off was significant on Monday night against the Commanders. Are we seeing the demise of Fletcher Cox right before our very eyes?
Yeah, it's weird. Every time you write him off, he seems to come up with a big game. Remember we did it last year?
Right, I'm officially doing it, Fletch. So if Ed's right, that when we write you off, you come up with a big game. I'm officially writing you off here, Fletcher.
Yeah. Listen, he's not the same player, obviously, that he was, the first 9 years or 8 years of his career. There's no doubt. And, we could be seeing the end of him in Philadelphia unless he wants to come back on a $5 or $6 million 1-year deal. But the Eagles aren't going to give him another $14 million to come back for a year. You
never know with Howie. Howie loves
him. I know, but I think part of the reason they brought him back at 14 was just, Howie has these allegiances and loyalties to a player. And, Fletcher's been here his whole career. So it was an overpayment, no doubt, after what we've seen from him last year and the year before. But, you got to hope that he has something left in the tank. It's not a good sign that he's going to play Sunday 6 days after playing 70 snaps. And yesterday saying that, he feels awful.
It's not a good sign.
Yeah, and that wasn't his word, but his body, he said, didn't feel real good.
You can say the word here. We're on
shitty. He said he felt shitty, and I'm sorry, Mom, if you're watching. But I think Jody, we've seen Fletch's kind of career crater here toward the last couple of years, but again, he's capable of putting together that one game just when you write him off that thinks, Fletch is back, and then kind of he goes back to what he was that we've seen. So maybe he's listening and, he decides that this is going to be the game, but it's definitely a concern when he says his body feels terrible after 70 snaps and now he's got to play again. So, we'll see how he does in Indy.
All right, Ed Kracz, last one from me, si.com/NFL/Eagles. Read Ed Kracz there, and me if you want to read me as well. Offense getting off the hook again. We're not talking about the offense at all. And to me, the biggest issue with the Philadelphia Eagles coming out of the Washington game was not about scheme on either side of the ball. It was about Dallas Goedert, and they lost Dallas Goedert for at least 4 games. Nick Sirianni was honest. Nobody's going to replace him. It's going to take a bunch of players. I think it's got more to do with Quez Watkins and Zach Pascal now, because they're your better options than the Jack Stolls, the Grant Calcaterras, the Tyree Jacksons of the world. How do you think the Eagles are going to handle the absence of Dallas Goedert?
Well, I mean, I think, and Nick even said there'll probably be more targets for A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith now because, he always said this offense runs through Goedert, Brown, and Smith. So you'll probably see an increase in targets. Where you might miss him a lot is in the run game. Goedert has made himself into a very good blocker at the point of attack. And, this Eagles run game's pretty good. And we'll see who can take up those snaps. I know Stoll is a good blocker, but now you're probably going to send him into coverage. I mean, what can Grant Calcaterra do? blocking in the run game. I don't know. I don't think he's really done it a whole lot. They activated Tyree Jackson, who looks huge, by the way. Have you noticed that, John? I mean, he just
he's
all muscled
freak.
up. He looks like a completely different guy than he did, last year. So, what's his role going to be? Can he block? But I think that's where you're probably going to see the Eagles miss Dallas most is in the run game, because he was a good blocker, and I'm not sure they have a blocker that's a backup at tight end that can block. I don't think Calcaterra can. I'm not sure Jackson can.
This would be the Richard Rodgers spot, but he's on the Chargers.
Yeah, I know. I saw that. He caught a pass on Sunday night against the 49ers. I'm like, what? Richard Rodgers? I didn't know he was still playing. But yeah, you're right. This would be the veteran spot. We saw Richard Rodgers come in and make some plays when the injuries happened at tight end a couple of years ago, but he's not there. So now, Calcaterra can catch, he can get open, but can he block? I mean, that to me is the most important thing, is who's going to fill that blocking role that Goddard leaves behind.
The much missed Dick Rod, not here with the Eagles.
Can you say that? Can you say that here?
We just did. Here's my final one, Ed. And I thought we were going to be talking about this on Birds 365 this week, and it is completely drifted off the radar because A, the Eagles lost, and B, the Eagles are dealing with injuries. I thought this might be the week that something leaked out of the Eagles free agents. Who is Howie trying to get a deal done with? He's famous for picking people that he thinks are part of the foundation of the team and getting a deal done before they get to free agency. He did as many deals last year, Sweat and Maddox and Goddard and Mailata. This year, there have been none. He hasn't gotten any done. And John and I have discussed leverage has been more on the player side than ownership side because there ain't they keep winning games. Hey, I'm a part of this. You got to pay me. Now they lose. So I thought maybe that would be a conversation this week. They've got bigger fish to fry in dealing with injuries and the like. Well, we're more than halfway through the season, and they haven't gotten any of their many free agents extended and signed to a deal that goes past the end of the season. Is it going to be next week, the week after? Or is it just going to be one of those years where, hey, we're too busy trying to win a Super Bowl to worry about the future? Howie's always been great at keeping an eye on the present and an eye on the future and being able to split his focus. We going to get any news along those lines in the next week or two?
Yeah, I'm surprised we haven't gotten any so far. You mentioned that they've done these deals in the past. I think last November they did Goddard, Maddox. Now they're both hurt, but you can't fault Howie for that, obviously. No. But then they did Jake Elliott last November as well. Listen, the guys that I think are probably the easiest, and John and I have talked about this to do, are guys like Marcus Epps, maybe, a guy who's starting in his first year. Maybe a 3-year, $18 million deal. I mean, seems easy enough. I think he would take it. I think Epps has proven that he can be a starter. He's played every single stinking snap this season so far, and he's been pretty good. So, I think he would be kind of an easy one. I think TJ Edwards could be an easy one as well. He came in as an undrafted kid in 2019, and the Eagles believed in him, and he was able to climb the ranks to become a starter. I think, he could be somebody that they could target as sort of an easy type of a signing. And then I think Isaac Seumalo. I mean, you don't want to lose next year Jason Kelce and Isaac Seumalo. So I don't know why you wouldn't try to look at Seumalo as well. I know he's had an injury history, but, he's a key part of that offensive line, a very underrated part of that offensive line. And, he might be another guy that you can kind of give maybe a 2-year deal to that he would take and stay in Philadelphia, a kid that was drafted here in 2016 with Carson Wentz. So to me, those three make the most sense. I mean, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, be great to sign him, but he's looking at like a $50 million a year deal at this point.
Too much leverage on Chauncey's side.
That's going to be an off-season battle, I think, if they want to re-sign him. And like I said, I think it starts at 15 and might climb to 18 if he keeps, playing the way he's playing.
Eagles aren't paying him that. I mean, he's made a lot of plays, but
he's their playmaker on defense. So that's not an easy contract to redo. But I think those three I mentioned, Edwards, Epps, and Seumalo, I mean, those are three I would be trying to get done right now, and then leave the others that might be a little bit more challenging until the off season.
Yeah.
Eddie
I'm
K,
with you.
it is always a pleasure whenever we get you on. Be careful sitting around, John. I think there's a potential another accident this week waiting to happen in Indianapolis. It's going to be cold there, and
Yeah.
McMullen likes his coffee, and it can get a little active.
I call it the incident. Ed
the
had
incident.
an incident.
I knew you were gonna bring that up.
It's spreading. There was an incident.
It's contagious.
At Kracz, yeah.
But it wasn't as bad as John, so it
wasn't
really
as bad.
doesn't rise to
But
the
mine
level
was
of the
friendly
incident.
fire.
Simple little
You
water
involved
spray.
other people. I think yours was worse.
Who'd
I'm trying
Kracz
to
spill
do
on?
Nobody.
It was close.
It was near
A
the
nice
food where
young
the food
lady
was
who
being served.
works for the Eagles on game day almost took some fire. Almost
good.
took
Just water. It's just water, not
Yeah.
coffee. Didn't get any stains on me. The big coffee stain you wore all night with that coffee on the thigh of your blue jeans.
Yeah.
Eddie Kracz.
I'm fighting a losing battle.
Yeah, you're not coming back from that one, Johnny Mac. Eddie K, thanks, bud. We'll talk to you again next week.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ed.
Ed Kracz here with us on Birds 365. All right, Mac and Mac coming back. Rob Ellis is going to join us in hour number 2. Robbie E, which you know from later in the day here on the JAKIB Media YouTube channel, will jump aboard here. Also, the host of the Eagles postgame show on their radio network. Looking forward. Haven't had Robbie E on in a couple of months. Mr. Ellis yet to come here on Birds 365.